Welcome, everybody, to the Haunted Hacker podcast. Tonight we have Kurt. I'm not going to murder his last name. I'll let him pronounce when I introduce him. Tonight is my third podcast this week, I think. Yeah, third. A little bit of news, a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. News, nothing new other than I'll be speaking to ICE and DHS. ICE this month, DHS next month. Also Cyprus on Tuesday, and the London Met Cyber Prevent Intervention Workshop for the kids on Tuesday as well. I think it's going to be crazy because I have to get up at 2 a.m. for Cyprus and then 4 a.m. for London. So Tuesday I won't be getting any sleep. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Kurt to unmute himself and introduce himself. Kurt, I don't want to murder your last name, so I'll let you do that.
Can you hear me right now?
Absolutely.
Okay. My name's Kurt Siuzdak. I'm actually a retired FBI agent, a former attaché from the U.S. in Iraq for 2 years. I ran a cyber unit for a number of years, which was an offensive operations unit. I'm maybe notorious for the fact that I'm considered the consigliere of FBI agents, since anytime an FBI agents get in trouble, they call me because I know you laugh. I wrote a book, the FBI Whistleblower Handbook, which is because the FBI has a special secret court where they handle whistleblower matters, unlike every other organization in the country. And I'm regarded as well tuned to that legal proceeding, and have done a lot of work within it. And I'm just I'm a cybersecurity guy. I'm actually just started working on a cyber course for Quinnipiac University and doing some other stuff within the realm, which is my true love. Law, boring. Cyber is just the real world. It's the mixed martial arts of business.
That's true. That's true. And I think us red teamers are probably the ninjas in the industry. So yeah, we got the chance to talk, I guess it was about a month ago, which we had a really good conversation. Probably could have lasted for hours. I think it lasted like 2 hours maybe. And we have a lot in common. I have a special place in my heart for the FBI, for other reasons, obviously. So yeah, tell me about what it's like to be in the FBI, first of all, and what it's like to come under fire of your own organization.
The FBI has probably the best employee base of any agency in this country. You don't have, they have a very limited workers' comp problem because in police departments, there's a lot of workers' comp, but you don't have that. Agents will get hurt and will get right back into the mix. The agents and employees are phenomenal. Once you get above the supervisor level, they've lost their mind. And here's there's a lot of reasons. One is because the Bureau was able to create its own standards for whistleblowers. They literally put their whistleblower court, and they created it within the Office of Attorney Recruitment and Management, which makes no sense. There's no administrative judge. There's just a bunch of people that work in this office that adjudicate whistleblower cases. And the vast majority of these whistleblower cases have to do with, hey, my boss is promoting his girlfriend to 5 levels. I think which one just came out with the Office of Inspector General. I'm working with one individual who she was sexually harassed, and then she went to the Employees Assistance Program, and the person in the Employees Assistance Program actually sent her a sex toy.
Wow.
And this person was a supervisor. And you sit there going, in any other organization in the world, they would get fired. Gone. In the FBI, they actually gave this guy, they gave him a incentive award 2 weeks after she filed her complaint. She called me up and I said, look, you have to file in federal court because they're going to burn you out. Because they've already picked sides. I had the employees don't want to put up with this stuff. This is not anything that any agent wants to have. The FBI is fidelity, bravery, integrity is their symbol, but it's really accountability. If you make a mistake, you admit it. We're required to. Everyone's required to admit their mistakes in the FBI. If they ask you, you have to be truthful, which is what we do, and then you're accountable in whichever manner. And the FBI is actually pretty good. If you do something really stupid, you're probably gonna get someone they call time on the bricks, a few days suspension, and then you're gonna come back and all forgiven. If you report misconduct, there's a good chance you're going to be burned out of the FBI.
Right.
And I have people ranging from senior executives who I'm working with, supervisors, managers, headquarter unit chiefs who have reported misconduct thinking, hey, that's what we're supposed to do. It's required.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden they find themselves under the gun and being abused, because basically within management, the philosophy is sit down and shut up. We're the bureau, you're not. In fact, I actually had a boss who I managed to get thrown out of the FBI. He once sat at my desk and turned to everyone and said, "This is my world. You just work here." And that's awe-inspiring. And because this guy had actually been thrown out of the executive service once for misconduct, and he somehow worked his way back up. And we're a government agency. People will talk about the FBI within the FBI, the managers, the family, and Senator Grassley calls it, it's one of the crime families within the bureau, and there's a lot of truth to that. And Senator Grassley has really been a protector of FBI employees, and I've heard plenty of managers talk poorly about the senator, but the senator gets it. It's about the people. And the thing is, when you look at agents and you look at what people have done to protect our country, it's stunning. I was in a kinetic activity in the middle of a road at one dark night in a combat zone, and an agent came up, ran up into the road, and stood behind me, kneeled behind me, in a place where there was literally machine gun fire coming. And finally, he was bumping up against my back and banging on me. I'm like, "What are you doing?" And he looked at me and said, "Your boss told me to stay on your back." So he physically went up there and used his body armor to protect my back. And you don't get any better than that. I mean, I watched some of the agents that are spectacular in their thought process. And one of the agents I've worked with was just a top tier undercover. He reported that another agent conducted, basically the other agent had drugs lost. I mean, he basically had them, the source stole the drug, the informant stole a few of the drugs, that the undercover actually reported it, and then the undercover was subject to punitive actions. And it's crazy. It doesn't make it. Nobody in the FBI, no one at supervisor level or below would understand it.
Yeah. And what's really strange is, like, when I first had my very first meeting with the FBI, my little come to Jesus meeting, one of the comments
those meetings.
right? One of the comments they made that really struck me odd was, okay, from here on out, from this point out, everything you have to say has to be factual, or we can come back and charge you for lying to the FBI. And that shook me. I was like, wait a minute. So if I remember something wrong, or if I leave a piece out that I don't remember, does that qualify? Like, I was trying to go through all of the possibilities of what could get me into trouble. But they have this air about them in those meetings that, they're not your friend. And then once I started working with them, you and I talked about the OIAs, otherwise illegal activity forms that I had to sign all the time, and the identities they give you. And, one of the questions that I have, and you being, former FBI and know the internal structure, is it just me, or does the FBI go to people like me and, people like other people in the community to get them to do the things that they just don't have the technical abilities to do? Is that why they go to people like me to help them?
Going to you, not just technical abilities, the ability to get access, the ability. I mean, first of all, if the FBI is talking to someone, and it's not just it's not just someone who's a criminal or I mean, you have people that are well placed who have access to some very unusual things that are of national interest. And so usually you think the traditional informant is for a criminal enterprise, but that's not, a lot of times that's not it. But the FBI has to manage obtaining all this information from all these groups and keeping it together and making sure it's processed properly and handling them. It's very difficult to do. I mean, and people don't think of informants as that's okay with FBI handling sources, which that's the Bureau refers to them, is one of the 2 or 3 things that is the FBI. If you can't, as an FBI agent, deal with people, you're not doing a great job. You're doing a very poor job. And the people that people think, oh, you get paid money for being a source. I've paid very, very few people any money, because most of the people do it because of God and country, and they know what the right and wrong is. And they're, by the end of it, I mean, it's hard. By the end of it, some of them are friends. They are. You can't let people, if that's not what's going on, then there's something wrong, because the person you're dealing with, if they don't trust you as an FBI agent, why would they do anything for you?
Exactly. And the handlers I had were pretty cool. One of them, of course, he was straight out of Quantico, ex-Marine, big Asian guy. Really nice. I to this day I still don't remember his name. But I do remember how he emailed me, and the first time he emailed me, it was from an email address that was, there are 4 lights, 4@gmail.com, right? So it's a flip back to Star Trek, where they were going after Picard and trying to brainwash him. So that really stuck with me. But when you deal with that kind of circumstance, and it's a very pressurized environment. On both sides, I think, because I was dealing with a nation state group that they wanted information from, and the Department of Energy wanted information from. So there was a lot of tension, and sometimes it was 2 o'clock in the morning phone calls. And I can't imagine being on the other end of the stick, where I'm having to control or keep this source in bounds, at the same time kind of navigating to the information that I need to get. And I think that some agents are better than that, or better at that than other people. What are your thoughts on that?
It's the best sources of information are the individuals who know what's important and who are able to communicate that effectively. That is because many times you may not, any law enforcement officer may not have that many dealings with somebody. They may go out, do their whole thing, and then have one single meeting in 3 months where they explain what's going on, especially if it's in a high risk environment or a combat zone, or somewhere where, I mean, if you in a war zone, you may be dealing with someone, a third party sees you, they take that person out and they execute them. It's not, this is real stakes, and you never know who is going to take umbrage by the fact that they think somebody's communicating with law enforcement and hurt them. I mean, I can't think of an exception where somebody has ever played down the security of a source. That really is the most important thing. Do no harm. If the agents aren't doing that and you don't trust them, how many of the agents did you trust that they had your back? Any of them?
Probably one, but that was years ago. He wasn't one of my handlers, but my handlers, I didn't trust them at all.
That really is. I mean, there's something missing there. But again, a lot of times it's hard because they want to call you up at X hour and ask you dumb questions about things you have nothing about, because the Bureau is requiring them to ask you about whether there's any domestic terrorism related to the Irish in the country, and they're right. Why are you calling me on this stuff? What do you bother me about this? Just tell them no, because I don't know any Irish. I'm not in that area. But that phone call, and none of the agents want to do that, but they're required to. And what you're talking about, that skill of being authentic and allowing somebody to feel like they are protected is the job for a number of agents, and it's a skill. It's new agents. It takes years to develop that.
Right. And unfortunately, I think that the agent that was my main handler was straight out of Quantico. And then he had another guy with him. There's always two, and for some reason, it's one young guy and then one really old guy. And I think the older guy was probably kind of guiding him to keep me in bounds. But it was kind of a weird situation. So I got paid cash, of course. That nothing was on paper, which I thought was really weird. But later on, I learned why. And they didn't call me by my name. They didn't address me by my name. I had to have a burner email. And they gave me a kind of a handle or a nickname, which I thought was really funny because when they found me, I was on Twitter and I had sunglasses in the picture. So my handle within the FBI was Shades. And everything I signed, I had to sign it with Shades, which is really weird because, when you're writing your name or you're signing a piece of paperwork that you've received cash, it's like, okay, you start writing your actual name. That took me some time to get used to. But the weirdness about, how they would approach me and probe me for, can you get this or can you get that? And then working a deal between basically them and the threat actor was really strange because I felt like the middleman, and I felt like either side could burn me at any time, because I felt like they didn't have the knowledge of that type of environment, and they used me because I knew that environment, and it felt like they didn't really understand the concepts of what went on within that group and that type of environment. And it may have been new to him. It may have been his first case, but of course, this was stateside. The FBI that I've ran into overseas are completely different. But yeah, it was stateside in Houston. But eventually, everything, they got what they wanted. I was able to go about my way. Everything happened from there on was kind of crazy. But while I was working with them, I did feel protected to a certain extent. I knew that if that group were to come after me, that they would help me out. But after that, it was different. So tell me about what
I just want to make one comment.
Yeah, sure.
But think of it like this: that there's no document, there's no document, no record anywhere in the bureau that's going to have your name on it.
Yeah.
That your name is, no matter. I mean, I was just reading about a police department that had records stolen from a breach, and they were saying, well, we don't think there was any source information. Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, right.
Because so that, I mean, the bureau agents understand. I mean, generally there may be exceptions, but bureau agents understand that that's critical. They're not going to have your name attached with anything. Now, I'm sure you've heard that if you have to testify, you're going to testify in true name, and that happens. But again, I look at the fact, well, more than the agents. Well, those are smart agents.
Right.
Because they've tapped not only someone who has access, but someone who has knowledge, technical skills.
Right.
And that's where you want to be. You want to deal with the smarter people in the world. And you can have sources of information where you're just asking them for technical information that has nothing to do with access. It's just they want to be able to ask important information about a question that no one in the bureau knows about that's confidential. And that, I'm sure you've had that with, what the heck does this mean?
Right.
And you're like, you're a jerk. You don't know anything. And you explain it to them, and they walk away and they take notes, and they're like, okay, now we know.
Yeah,
but as an agent, you can't know everything.
Yeah, they actually showed up to the meeting with a interpreter. A Russian interpreter. I thought it was really funny because I sat down at the table and my lawyer, great lawyer. I don't know if he watches my podcast or not, but David Adler, who is former CIA, was my lawyer. Excellent lawyer. And he instructed me before we even went up into the building, which first of all was a really weird building. I was going to the U.S. Attorney's office, which was in a Wells Fargo building in downtown Houston. But David told me, he said, just don't say anything. I'll work this. You have something that they need. So maybe we can get, some payback for this. Maybe we can get something out of it. And we did. I thought it was really funny. The first thing that I asked for, they said, okay, we need you to get access to this, and we need you to talk to these people. We need you to get this. And I said, well, I'm not doing that on my computer. And so they offered to buy me a computer and give it to me. And I said, no, no, no. How about you just give me the cash that you would spend on the computer? I'll go buy my own. Because I was like totally terrified that they would give me something that was already tapped. And I was like, no, no, no. But I did, I did work well with them. The operation that we did was kind of convoluted towards the end, but that was during the 2016 election, and they were chasing down ghosts that I think resided within maybe the agency as well as within politicians, because they were trying to find out who was manipulating the voting systems. So it was a really interesting time for me. So tell me, Kurt, tell me what it was like for you. What did you go through that brought you out the other side that said, hey, I need to help people within the agency that is, being treated wrong or being treated like I was. So what brought that on? What chain of events led to you becoming what you are now?
When I have, I think I would think it's the war in Iraq, because I think that I watched so many good people go in there with standards and have standards and be hurt by standards that I don't, and watching agents that did just remarkable stuff. And then they deserve managers that were better than they had. And I think that there's been numerous New York Post articles about different sexual harassment and other problems. And I think, where's the standards? The standards that don't apply to the bosses. And that kept going. At one point, the FBI actually tried to wiretap me. They had a meeting in the New Haven FBI, and they had the lawyer, and they had a few of the few ASACs, second charge, and some other people. And they brought in a technical agent, and they said, here's what we want to do. We want to put up a wiretap on Kurt Siuzdak and Omar Montoya, but it was going to catch me either way. The targets were the same. And the agent looked at him and said, first of all, that's never going to happen. Second of all, I'm going to forget we had this conversation. He walked out. Well, and that's what agents do. He knew what he knew right there was they were going to try to get consensual wiretap, which wasn't correct. That New Haven, they would never let a field office run that against their own people. They would do that from a big office like New York or headquarters, but they're not going to let some small office try to do that nonsense. And so the agent understood that, because he had the technical prowess to understand that, and he had the experience, and he said, no way. So he walked out and told someone else right away about, what are these guys doing? The other person walked out, actually took notes on the interview that he had, that the meeting that he had with the technical agent, wrote the whole thing down, took the notes, brought him to his house, and kept the notes in his house. And I found out about this afterwards, because the person admitted, yes, I have the notes in my house. And then the FBI either seized them or ordered the records to be taken into custody. But it's like, I'm not, of all the people in the world, you're looking at, what are you wiretapping me for? I actually, at the end of it, there was a judge. I actually sued the Bureau. And I was beating the living daylights out of them. They didn't know which way it was coming. And what the reason was, because the employees were on my side. I understood how to tap the resources of the employees who didn't want any of that nonsense and were defending me. Even ones who didn't like me were defending me, which I thought was remarkable. Yeah, that's the best.
That's awesome.
But at one point, we were getting close to the trial. The magistrate asked if I would settle the case. I'm like, yeah, I'm a licensed attorney here. I'm not. I just want, there's right and wrong, simply. So, but I'm licensed to practice in Connecticut in federal court. So I'm not going to embarrass the court. I'm going to embarrass the people here, but the FBI is going to be better for it. So after that discussion, somebody from the U.S. attorney, someone from the judges from that district court called up the Department of Justice, said, you got to settle this case. He goes, this guy's got him. I mean, he's got the Bureau. He's going to hurt the Bureau. He knows what he's doing, and he's a lawyer. So then DOJ called up the FBI. The FBI then leaked it to the press down at headquarters, and they wrote an article about it, which I think was the article that actually discussed other agents committing suicide because of these pressures. But they discussed how the judges called up and said, you got to end this. You got to stop this stuff. And the Bureau, right after that, I drove home. My son was upset because he got off the bus and noticed that there were 2 vehicles, which he would have known were FBI vehicles.
Mm.
He looked at them and said, they're FBI vehicles sitting across the street waiting. So he ran home to my wife and said, hey, there's 2 FBI vehicles. What are they doing here? Are they here to clip Kurt, or, clip my dad? Or and she's like, no. So I drove home just then. I pulled by my driveway and then stopped because I'll just read a newspaper for a second, see what's going on. Pulled forward, and then one of those vehicles came down the road to see if I was parked in the driveway, and then they didn't see my car parked right next to my driveway. Stopped right in front of me. I identified the head of the field office. The boss of the field office was doing her own surveillance, and when the SAC of the field office is doing her own surveillance with 120 agents, she's lost.
Yeah.
She can't trust anyone. At that point, it was just a big laugh. And then another police officer on my street saw that, knew exactly what it was, and pushed, and it turned into a debacle for him. And I think within a month or 2 after that, both of the bosses were gone. And I know that by rumor mill, I heard they told the boss when the day they settled with me, those people were gone. And that was actually, I think, almost to the day that they settled, they were gone. And then I started getting phone calls I had gotten numbers of phone calls from agents that were completely distraught by misconduct, where they reported stuff and they didn't understand why the FBI was going after them. I can count 5 or 6 agents who called up that were suicidal. That I came home at 5 o'clock at night. I got some agent who I don't know, who never met, who's calling me up asking me, what do I do? And and then I'm playing suicide prevention as an SSA or supervisory special agent in New Haven for somebody in another part of the country. And do I tell the FBI, who then would give them a reason to immediately dismiss these people? No.
Right.
So I have to make sure they're safe and give them guidance. And most of the feedback I've gotten was that the guidance was excellent. So I actually took my notes and then put them into a book, and that was the book I wrote after I retired. It was just the notes. It was actually reviewed by the FBI. They cleared the book. And then and so there's just a set of notes out there for how agents can handle reporting misconduct.
Right. And that's tough too, because when you think about it, so I know in the IC that I was in, the intelligence community, you're under such strict pressure, right? And you're expected to be superhuman. So if I were to go to, let's say, my lieutenant and say, hey, look, I'm really depressed, what's the first thing that happens? They strip you of your security clearance. I have to think that the FBI would look at it the same way, as being like a faulty character, or, there was something wrong with that agent, so we've got to get rid of them because of the fact that they have that human ailment called depression.
Well, that's a huge issue, especially since the Bureau has deployed so many people to combat zones, and they have and with very little therapy afterwards or anything. So they have a lot of issues. Now, I think that the standard has to be, and I think it really is, if you're being treated, then it's okay. If you're untreated, then you're suffering consequences. And the perfect example of that is you may not know this, but there are some agents who actually have drank alcohol and gotten into DWIs, and the standard there is you have to go into treatment, and then you can't drink and drive. And
right.
If you're not in that, doing that type of therapy, whether it's AA or whatever, to prevent that, you're not going to survive in the Bureau.
Right.
But I think law enforcement has a very poor reputation of doing any type of therapy for their employees. I have a friend of mine who's just up the street. He walked into a house and found, I think, 4 children that were stuffed into an oven and burned.
Wow.
And they were killed in an oven. and they provided him no therapy. There was no intervention, and
That's
you
crazy.
just don't. Yeah, you just don't unsee that stuff.
No,
And
that's
that's
something, especially like in the Middle East, like that stuff sticks with you forever. It's not something
common.
that you can shake by yourself.
Yeah, I mean, that was the law enforcement has several problems. One is they don't do their therapy. They don't respect the mental health of their people very well, and the intervention is poor. And I would say the other problem they have is TikTok, because I'm sitting here watching these shows where they used to say everything, oh, these bad officers or bad agents are just the exception. And now every fifth flip on TikTok is some officer berating somebody or giving a speech to someone or forcing someone out of a car. And the generation right now is being alienated from law enforcement because they don't they're looking at going, wait, we have rights. And why are all these cops thinking they can do this to us? Why they can actually pull us out of cars, they can arrest us, they can do the illegal searches. Those days are on. That I think with the body cams, it's much easier to catch a cop, but TikTok puts it all in the public.
Oh yeah, there's actually, so I was living on the river here locally, and I had a sports bar across the street from me, and the street was a very small street. It was 2-lane street, but people flew down this road. And right before I moved to this location I'm in now, I heard tires squealing and a thud, and it sounded like somebody hit another car. So I opened up the window, and I saw out that this guy in his vehicle had nailed this female, and she was not in good shape. And so all these people started gathering. I'm in the South, by the way, and the guy who had hit the female was African American in a predominant white neighborhood. And there was probably about, I would say, nowhere short of 10 people, 10 cops, all white male cops around this black guy. And I really had to, I kept the window open. I kept my phone there just in case, because with cops, it's really difficult. I felt like I was obligated to make sure that if something happened, I caught it. Because this definitely was not this guy's fault. She was obviously had been drinking at the pub, came across the street, whack, she got nailed. And there was no crosswalk, and she was not at the light or anything. She just crossed between cars. But it's sad that you have to think that way nowadays. You have to think about something's going on. I've got to maintain, I've got to watch and make sure, like, oversee the situation in case it gets out of hand. And I know, like, with the FBI, it's completely different. With like local law enforcement, you have to think about how much they get paid for one, which is ridiculous. They get paid less than trashmen do, and they're putting their lives on the line every day. And of course,
I think they get paid pretty well.
Some
I mean,
of them
FBI agents, you look at some making some, especially if you're on Long Island and making some money. You go to New Orleans, you're making less, but a lot of them are making, with overtime. There's things, incentive to keep them in there.
right.
But if you look at the job, it used to be the cops would give some speech that they have a right to berate someone or give a speech, and now people realize, why am I sitting here listening to this stuff? I don't have to. That's not their job.
Right.
And I think the deterrent, the war on drugs. I mean, and here's where you get with the war. The war on drugs really gave the police. They were seizing cars. That was a huge moneymaker. Then the war in Afghanistan happens, and now we have soldiers protecting the people overseas that are actually growing the heroin. So the war on drugs isn't really going, and I don't think anybody that's a street agent in New York or Newark is going to think, well, that there's something wrong now here. If we're, if we have privates getting shot and dying, and they're trying to protect an infrastructure that basically the number one commodity is heroin, and that heroin's coming right over to the streets in the US. And that, it just looks wrong. And the other thing that's amazing is heroin used to be the black drug.
Mhm.
It was the African American community. You could arrest. I mean, cocaine, heroin is much worse than cocaine.
Now it's
But that was
Midwest. Now it's Midwest, middle income, middle wealth, white families that are dealing with heroin.
yes, oxys.
Hmm.
Marijuana is not the great gateway drug. It's oxycontin, oxycodone, and that was that turned it from the inner city black kid who's getting
Suburbs.
20 years in jail to now we have mom
Hmm.
who can't afford oxycontin, and
Yep.
and this stuff is cruel. I actually one of my actually I even liked the guy until I had my throat operated on right after I got back from the Gulf, and it was the worst surgery I ever had. I was 3 weeks of healing with gauze packed up in my nose. I came
Oof.
back to work in the FBI, and I was sitting there, I was shaking, I was sweating, and then an agent came up to me, sat on my desk, and he looked at me. He said, "Listen, your pupils are the size of pins. Your hands are shaking. You're sweating." He said, "You're having a real rough time. If I see you smiling in the next 4 days, I'm opening a case on you because
Wow.
you are on the point where you will be hooked." And he goes, "I'm not going to let that happen." And he became almost my best friend and my partner, but he was
Mm.
serious. I mean, I was sitting there. I had thought of it that, oh, I need to go get some more, but that was horrible. And Oxy was actually, oh, it was non-addictive. Wasn't that the advertisement? No, that's not addictive. Then the moms got it, and then all of a sudden it's not just Black America, it's
Right.
everywhere. And
Right.
and then heroin's everywhere. In
Mm.
Connecticut, we have no methamphetamines in the Midwest is still the big thing. In Connecticut, there is no meth because
Yeah.
heroin's so cheap.
Yep.
Heroin's cheap because the Taliban kept the heroin prices, kept the heroin supply low. But when the U.S. came in there, heroin got cheap and it is abundant now because they wouldn't stop the flow. How
Not only
crazy is that?
that, that's crazy, but not only that, like we gave that whole country back to the Taliban recently. So they're back in business. And it wasn't like they were ever really taken out of business, to be honest with you. And I know we talked a little bit about that in our phone call previously.
Yeah, yeah, but what a great gift to China. I'm going to give you China here. Have Afghanistan. Enjoy it. You're going to love the place. China's building the Silk Road. I'm just like, we're going to find out in 5 years if that was the dumbest thing we ever did or absolutely the most ingenious thing. Because with the amount of Muslims that are being abused in China, how long is it going to be before the Muslims in the middle in Afghanistan are supporting those guys?
Yep.
And I think China is going to find out that they decided to have a little alliance with these terrorist organizations.
Bad
And
mistake.
yeah, very fungible. There's no one there. That is going to be an interesting lesson for China. And I think they're already learning that lesson.
Yeah, I think so too. One thing that I experienced after my time with the FBI as a CI was getting caught on every list known to man. The first sign was hitting the airport and getting a 4S boarding pass every single time. And I asked the lady at the desk, I said, how come I get this random special screening every single time? It doesn't seem too random anymore. And she goes, well, you're on a list. I was like, well, you end up on these lists and nobody tells you what they're about. And then I go to a bank and try to get a bank account. Sorry, but you're on a list, a DHS list. And I'm like, wait, which list is this? OFAC. It's like everything happened post dealing with the FBI. And I don't know if it's coincidence or if it was already happening and I just didn't know it. But it was eye-opening, the amount of pressure that they can put on an individual based on their lifestyle, cutting off things that every citizen should have. They really put pressure on you. They really make things difficult sometimes.
It's not just people outside the FBI. My son is always was talking. My youngest son was talking about bad guys and good guys, and I was like, look, you can't talk about that when people get arrested because like nearly everybody that I've ever met that's been arrested has been a good guy, doing stupid things or doing crazy things or things they knew were wrong, but most of it was judged by weakness. But but then they get themselves into these situations where yes, it can affect your freedom in a number of different ways, from flying to having banks are going to shut down your account if you're a subject of an investigation or related. I was actually arrested twice in one day as an FBI agent.
That's crazy.
Once by a foreign country. And after I got done with that, I actually flew back to the U.S., went into Maine with a bunch of military guys, and then had to arrest someone who was a spy. And because I have my ID on me, they arrested me and the spy, which I thought was smart. And I slept in the same cell with the guy for the remainder until the FBI bailed me out. And it took their sweet time. It took like 6 hours to get me out. I had a nice sleep, but it was it's a hard right now. Your freedoms are limited.
Oh, and they're at a very fragile state, especially in the U.S. When you look at the way that our government's going and the way the country's going and the political tensions and just the wrongdoing that's going on, everybody's civil liberties and privacy especially is so fragile. It's like a piece of glass that you put on a slide to look under a microscope, that thin and that fragile, I think.
I don't think the younger generation really appreciates what privacy is.
No, they don't.
I think they have become used to selling their privacy for a free application.
Absolutely.
That's it. How painful. I mean, and again, even the courts, I think, are recognizing before with phones that there's something different about phones right now versus 30 or 40 years ago. Phones are not just phones. They contain every bit of private information that you may have, including your passwords.
I mean, think about it with the Apple iPhone and the watch, right? So you're off doing your thing. Not only is it recording your heart rate, your medical stuff on your phone and your watch, but that data, come to find out, is being sent back to Apple. Apple is getting your health data. I interviewed a guy this week, Jonathan Scott, goes by Data, who disclosed a vulnerability in Apple iOS 15.2 just like 2 weeks ago. And the amount of data that we're giving back to these companies and the big tech is just insane.
I actually I was consulting with a law firm that was dealing with a person who got arrested, and it appeared that their arrest happened because the person who got arrested was the boyfriend of the cop's best friend's wife, or ex-wife. So all of a sudden, how coincidentally, it's a road stop. Who knew? And they get arrested, and it was so coincidental. And they're like, "Well, what do we do?" And I'm like, "Well, you have body cameras. You can pull their videos. You can pull all the. But then again, maybe you just order the court to turn over their Google history and look at the maps, and then you're going to know if that police officer was sitting right by that house." Because nobody wants to be set up. Maybe, and it's possible it wasn't, but I mean, I've just been weird coincidences in law enforcement, but nobody wants police officers that are going to set anyone up. Because if they're going to do it to them, they're going to do it to you.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's how it works. But then the law firm was like, oh my. I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of data. Now I'll go on my little rant about Apple, which is a fine company, and I worked child exploitation as a cyber supervisor. I worked child exploitation, which is all online exploitation. So Apple, fortunately, decided to get into the child exploitation business. So they now are going to scan everyone's phones who are Apple customers to determine whether they have child exploitation material, child porn on their on their phone. So they're doing that by what? Checking the hashes for all of the records. But there's never been a collision when it comes to MD5 hashes, has there? No.
Never.
So if Apple's not checking the data, checking the videos to verify that they're not child porn, what are the chances that they make a mistake and turn over some innocent person's information to a police department? And I don't know if there's any worse charge you can have than be accused of creating or possessing child porn. First of all, it gets you massive time in jail. But now Apple, your phone company's in the business of checking you for child porn, of hunting for your child porn. And
Right.
what's crazy enough is we already know that there's been incidents where TV or internet personalities have been sent child porn specifically to be targeted.
Yeah.
So who would want to have a phone that would have where the phone company is going to be, the big brother? My God.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you think about, so when I was in school, one of the books I had to read was 1984. And I thought back then, that the internet was just coming into being, BBSs were just being built. Technology was starting to advance quickly. And I thought, this is real. Like, this can truly become bad. But then I did a talk, I guess it was last year, and I was writing this talk and I was developing the slides, and it was called 1984. And it was my concepts from before I got into cybersecurity and my thoughts of the world in general, as opposed to what it's like now and what I have the capability of doing. And it's like 1984 was more of a comic book compared to what is actually in place now. When you look at Pegasus spyware, when you look at all of the Tempest and all of the collection of data and X key score and stuff that Snowden had pulled up. I mean, 1984 is a drop of water in an ocean compared to what we're in now.
In China. And China their tech is going all over the world. And China hasn't just decided to collect on just their own citizens. They're going to collect on everyone.
Yeah, the first stop was the VA.
Just like any nation state.
Yeah, the first stop was the VA. They popped the VA and got medical records and identities, and they've been building dossiers on American citizens for years. And nobody knows why. Like, just general citizens, they're building full dossiers on people. And it's bad enough when I have to send so here's a funny story for you, Kurt. I was curious about what data the government had about me. So I knew
None.
that you
FBI has nothing on you. You're safe. It's all private. Don't worry about it.
so I wrote them a letter. I did the online, Freedom of Information Act and requested anything that had my information in it. Well, I get this nice little envelope back, and my roommate back in Alabama got the mail, and he sent me a screenshot, a photo of this envelope from the Department of Justice, and he was kind of like, "Oh shit." I said, no, it's no big deal. It's probably my return on the FOIA. So he opens it up and takes pictures of it to send to me. And I'm looking at it, and literally, knowing my history with the FBI, knowing all the work that I've done and that, things are linked to today, but the letter itself was literally, we have no comment on no comment. And I was like, wait a minute, what does that even mean? Like, you can't tell me if there was, and if you could tell me, you still can't tell me. Like, it was so mind-boggling. The words that they used was lawyer speak, obviously, and I had no fucking clue what it said. Like, it made no sense.
And you're worried. I'm not worried about the government.
Mm-hmm.
I'm worried about the companies that are dealing with China.
Yeah,
the government. I mean, here's the fact. I mean, we live and are lucky to be protected by the most powerful defense organization in the entire universe that we know of. But there are up and coming powers that understand really the beauty of technology.
Right. And those same powers are launching hypersonic missiles into space.
Yeah. And they're also, by the way, getting getting corporations, U.S. corporations, to deal with them. And the U.S. corporations are bending to the will of these foreign powers. And that means that the foreign powers are going to exploit whatever data they can get out of those corporations. And that's scary. I mean, ultimately, every 4 years, we get to change who the hell runs this place.
Thank God.
And thank God. You know what? Thank God. You know, and the reality is, Democrat, they're all lousy. I mean, that's just a fact. It takes power. Power corrupts. You have
power corrupts people. Absolutely.
Yes.
Completely. Yeah.
And it's okay. We could throw. That's the whole purpose of that. Was the founding fathers knew it. They knew that governments were bad and they had that potential, and that we want to be able to shake things up. but we don't have that. We don't have the possibility with these foreign adversaries.
No,
And
not
those
only
four-
that, but think about the elections and think about how our politics are going right now. I mean, as a citizen, I don't really think that we have the capability of changing the way things go, because I think that the government, and this may sound, tinfoil hattish, but the way that I look at the government is it's one large corporation now, and they're each in business deals with each other, and the people have been kind of pushed out, is the way I look at it.
I've been struggling with this with Afghanistan, because having a coherent thought process on Afghanistan, and then watching Trump. Now, whether I'm for Trump or against Trump, now I actually vote. I voted for Trump the first time, and I didn't vote for him the second time. Here's the reason I didn't vote for him the second time was I couldn't let my kids listen to him. He was always so mean. And you really want a president that's actually not. You want presidential, not someone who's fighting with everybody in town. But
Right.
here or there. But what was interesting was Biden told Obama, don't follow them, don't let the military suck you into getting 30,000 troops over to Afghanistan, because they're going to ask for another 40,000, which evidently happened. And Obama tried to get the soldiers out of Afghanistan. In 2014, the combat mission really ended, I think, 2014.
Right.
But we're still there. The military's still there. And then Trump did everything. I think he earnestly tried to get people out of Afghanistan during his president, and everyone fought him. Then after he lost, theoretically, or however you think the election went, after it looked like he lost. He then decided to pull the plug on the military mission. That was as important to him as actually fighting his election. And so he ordered it. And then people met with him and said, keep them in. And then so Biden comes in, and Biden's like, we're out of here. We're gone. And the military pushes to extend that mission for another 6 months, and then extends it again for more time. Now, the military must have been pretty much assured that Biden was no longer going to play this game.
Right.
But they weren't even ready to leave. I mean, and I actually had this experience over in Iraq where the military couldn't pull out of anything. They were reluctant. Then once the military was there, that infrastructure the military controlled every palace. If you were a general, you had to have a palace. And that was disturbing.
Right.
But then to watch the military know that our president was going to tell them to leave and still keep everything in place until it turned into a complete disaster was an embarrassment.
Yeah.
And Biden made it perfectly clear.
Oh, yeah. And, going back to Iraq, one of the first places that we took over and made a presence was Saddam's palace. I mean, that's typical. You go in, you take over the country and set up shop in the leader's headquarters.
I lived there. I lived in it.
Yeah, with a nice pool out back.
Oh yeah, that was one. Yeah, the nice pool. You had a long hallway through it, and then all these. Then what we do, like we're the low rent guys. We bring in the mobile homes. We throw all the pods out back after ruin the whole place for Saddam. Yes. That
and the super yacht that they end up blowing up off the shore. But yeah, I mean that's like the biggest slap in the face to any foreign dictator is taking over their home and setting up shop. But one thing I don't understand, and I've fought this forever since I've been of legal age and able to be in the military, was the fact that when we have presidents that come in and they run for office, why are we not requiring the chief of the biggest army in the military in the world? Why aren't we requiring them to have some honorable military service? That to me is bullshit. To me, that was the hardest part of following any president, because I had been through a couple presidents in the military, and taking direction and hearing them politicize what I was actually doing and knowing that they had no experience in what I was doing was disturbing, because to me, it felt like a money enterprise-driven conflict. It was no longer freeing people and spreading democracy. It was more like infecting countries with that mantra of enterprise and capitalism.
I got to tell you, I'm actually on the other end of it.
Okay.
I mean, my son lived almost his entire life with a country at war. He was born in 2004, and he lived with soldiers overseas, and there's something disturbing about that.
Yeah, totally.
The eternal wars. Are we Rome? I mean, I think that I think the president has less power than people give him credit for. I think that the presidency, and you always see this with, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and then the congressman said, "Look, you ain't can do any of that because we got the votes. You could do, presidential edict, but we're going to just change it in 4 years." I don't think the presidents have as much power as they think they do. But also, I don't want presidents. I want presidents that are as much inward looking as outward. Presidents that looking at our country and our infrastructure and looking at the people and trying to figure out how this collection of people should handle themselves.
Well, they've lost touch of that, though. I think that the government as a whole has lost touch with what people actually go through on a citizen level. I think they put themselves so far above us and above the law and above everything that's going on and isolate themselves that they really don't have that in touch and that empathy with normal everyday people.
Yeah, that's the same thing with the military. If you have a president who's the military, I don't want a president who's the military leader. He has the largest military in the world to advise him. He doesn't really need to have that, I need to be the, Caesar or whatever it is. But isn't there something beautiful about having a woman president that doesn't have any military?
Condoleezza Rice was my biggest. If we could have Condoleezza Rice as president of the United States, I would never have anything bad to say about the government ever again. Because she's intelligent, she was effective, she knows what she's doing. But here's the problem, right? So the late Colin Powell, when they addressed him about becoming president or running for president, he said, "The people who are qualified to become president don't want the fucking job."
That's correct.
And it's true, because they're a voice and they're a puppet. But the problem is, when we're talking about military, the president has the power to enact, go into war basically without solid, backing. We saw that with Bush, and the war powers are extremely powerful. That's what worries me as a military member, is that here's a guy that can pull the trigger on a war who's never been in war. That's my biggest pet peeve. But the whole loss of contact with humanity and civilians with the government is what's really terrifying me. Because even like you look at the way they handle COVID, you look at the way that they address people like normal everyday people, and it's not like it used to be. It's not like during Ronald Reagan's time. We've become basically a different class, and we've put them on a pedestal, and they've taken that pedestal for a run.
I like the fact that government is conflicted. There are political fights, that people get out there and those moms want to go and complain about the educational system and COVID or no COVID, because that's what this political system is about. Right. We are not supposed to be of one mind. We are of 13. We started with 13 states. We're 50 states. We're a whole bunch of different people, and we all have different opinions. And sometimes we come to consensus regionally, locally, and sometimes nationally. But that's what makes America the great place it is, because our politics are real. Right. Unlike China, where they're not real, or Saddam's, where 97.9 or 99.7% vote against them. But that's people. My kids are always like, well, we should get along. I don't want us to get along. Actually, I don't even want the Congress to get along, because if they get along, they just spend more money. If the president hates Congress, Congress hates the president, taxes aren't going up. That's kind of how it works. And when it's important, the U.S. does come together. That seems
as a people.
Yeah. That's the worst thing. Someone once told me when I forget what it was with Iran, they were pushing something and they're pushing an issue. And one of the generals said, the last thing you want to do is get the U.S. against you, because when the people of the U.S. against you, it doesn't matter. That's what makes us strong. And that's just the truth. That's always been the truth.
Yeah, I think
that's the new world of us.
I think Soleimani experienced that firsthand.
Yeah, well, but that's again, that's one of the Soleimani. Yeah, when he learned, but he learned a hard lesson, which was that if you want to take over an embassy, the embassy, and he was, I mean, here's a guy who's a genius. I mean, he really was. He's been, and everyone says Soleimani, who is the head of the IRGC, he was extremist. He didn't begin as an extremist.
No.
And he would, and I think he was, for whatever possibility I would have of actually having interacting, and knowing about him, he was a man of his word. He was moderate. But again, in Iran, most people are moderate. I mean, that, Iran has less people going to mosque than the U.S. has people going to church.
Exactly.
They're more secular. They're not as this. I mean, the government is fanatic, but the people aren't. The people like but Soleimani learned, what was it? He learned about, his idea was, if we want to bother the U.S. embassy, we'll do it with unarmed protesters, and that's the weak point with the U.S. The U.S. doesn't know how to handle unarmed protesters, and so they decided they put some protesters by the U.S. embassy, and then all of a sudden, he took I think Russia sent a Hellfire missile at him. I mean, was it Israel, Russia? Somebody hit him with a missile, and then he died. But again, you're pushing the envelope there. U.S. is going to protect itself. In some way or another, the U.S. is going to protect itself. We're very good at that.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Again, Trump, that was, Trump is complex into the point where he was not, I don't think he was very, very friendly to our allies. He seemed to like dictators. But then when it comes to pushing the button, he evidently once considered doing an attack on Iran and didn't do it. Probably smart. And then all of a sudden, the head of one of our chief adversarial military formations, he just decapitated.
Yeah.
That's. I mean, like I said, Trump knew how to play chess. If he was erratic, it created problems for other people.
Yeah,
just as much as
I think he's still doing that. I think he's still being very tactical and with a strategic mindset as well. Because look at the latest, I guess, public appearances by him and prepping himself for the 2024 election. I think that he's still playing that strategic game, and he knows how to play it. And that's the good thing about him. Is he knows how to play the game. He knows how to get people to work in certain, I guess, areas and work towards a certain goal. But I still can't get past the fact that, looking at the way the country's gone over the past 10 years, and, when I came back to the US a year ago this month, I walked into a country that had been basically picked apart by COVID. And it just seemed crazy to see like a city like Seattle, where people and protesters had taken over city blocks and was keeping the police out and burning down buildings, government buildings in big cities. It just blew my mind. When I left the country, we were just getting through the end of the war, and people were pro-American and patriotic. And I come back and it's like, wait a minute, we're setting shit on fire. What happened in that couple of years that I've been gone? I mean, it's been a huge shift since, I think, the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that the overreach, I think the government, again, and this is the TikTok thing. People looked at back in, the authority was the thing. When I back in 1992, I think the Connecticut State Police had hundreds of applications. Now the Connecticut State Police can't get anyone to join. The ranks are very thin. People like the authority. Now people look at the authority as somewhat oppressive. But people don't find corporations to be oppressive, which is amazing. So we have the corporations are sneaking there. The respect law enforcement. When the theory of the broken glass theory of law enforcement, if you stop the people from breaking glass and doing minor crimes, you're going to stop the major crimes. But then all of a sudden you have stop and frisk, which then becomes a racial issue. And in the U.S., our weakness is the fact that we had slaves. That was,
absolutely.
and that's still our problem.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. You live in, like, I live in the South, and you can still feel that tension.
Yes.
And as much as we say that we, as a country, we're not that way anymore, we absolutely are.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's something that's ever going to go away. When you carry out an atrocity like that on generations of a certain people, that you can't make that up. You can't fix that. And it's not just one race against the other; it's races against all races. And I think that's what divides us as a country.
It wasn't the Klan
Mhm.
that oppressed the African Americans and the
It was
ex-slaves.
a
The
Democratic
government.
Party.
That's right. Well, yeah. It was local law enforcement. That was
Right.
the problem. It was the authority.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, if crime, if in the North, we're set. I mean, I was in Louisiana. I actually came back to Connecticut and found Connecticut more segregated than Louisiana, not economically segregated, because all of the African Americans were in a few major cities.
Mhm.
And then when you go to the suburbs, they were predominantly white. Now there
Right.
were Vietnamese, there were some Indians, but the African Americans have not made major gains into the cities. But you go down south. I mean, I still remember seeing signs, and this is after they weren't allowed in Louisiana, that talked about whites only for water fountains.
Oh, you're talking about on the East Texas area of
Oh yeah,
Louisiana,
Lake
in
Charles and
Vidor, Texas, some of
oh
those
yeah.
places. And what really disgusts me, right? So some of my best friends are African American. I just had Blacks in Cybersecurity on. I also had Black Girls Hack. And as a people, like, we're friends on our level. But when you get up to the enterprise level and government, you lose that. You lose it quickly. And that's something I'll never understand, is how we can't get along just because of color of our skin. That makes no sense to me. And so that's what I try to bring to cybersecurity is we can all do this together. Like, there's no reason to be separate, and there should be no seclusion. Everything should be all inclusive, whether it be Asian, Black, white, Indian, whatever. It should be one group to fight a common cause. And I think that's the way that the U.S. should be. But politicians and money is what drives that segregation and that hatred. And not to mention, man, you look at the Democratic Party and you look at how they fuel off of that racial tension and how they drive that to boost their voting. It drives me insane. And then the southern border, don't get me started on the southern border. That is out of control.
Yeah, but if you stop, I mean, again here, I think that both parties have benefited from institutional racism.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Both parties. One of the, in fact, that one of the remarkable things that happened recently was the Webster's dictionary changed the definition of racism.
Oh, really?
And yes, they changed maybe a year and a half ago. And some young woman, African American Black woman, wrote, it said, "This is, your definition's wrong," and because it's also supporting the status quo that reinforces racism is also qualifies. And Webster's and their full name I can't remember, but they came back and said, "You're right," because the institutions. The institutions do, in fact, have been historically biased against minorities. Now, in the FBI, the women are not 50% of the FBI agents.
Really?
In fact, no, they're not. They're like they're much smaller minority, and because of how the FBI does their promotion scheme, basically you have to move around to multiple offices to get promoted. So you have to go from one field office headquarters, but bounce around 4 or 5 times. But if you're a woman, you're not going to do that because you're a mother. You may be a mother.
Right.
So they have lost this huge pool of great people with huge potential because they're unwilling to bounce around between offices every 2 years to get promoted because they have kids.
Right.
And that's crazy because we don't have that many women, and they should be. When I first joined the FBI in New York, someone pulled me aside and said, "Look, forget about what you're going to work. get bank robberies, organized crime, go pick your supervisor. And they're like, well, okay, he goes, no, here's what you do. Pick someone who's a parent. Pick someone who's a parent because they'll treat you like a kid. They'll know you have to be punished sometimes. You have to be treated, given some leeway. But he goes, there's some having, and I take that as not necessarily parents, but life experience.
Right.
People who have a diverse life experience are able to handle people differently. Right. Women have that. They have been a minority, and the Bureau has not been able to change its management program to get more women in. And they have very few African Americans. They have almost no Middle Easterners, and the one Middle Eastern person I know is actually I'm assisting because he was a whistleblower and he got pretty much wiped out. And they actually, his supervisor had a sign on his desk. The supervisor of this man has sign on his desk that said, I'm a pork eating crusader.
Wow.
And this agent was an agent who was blown up in a Humvee with a grenade in the Humvee.
Wow.
And why would you ever insult a guy like that?
I mean, how is that even acceptable to have that sign on your desk in a government facility?
Well, and here's where I go to the institutional thing. I actually know that supervisor was overseas. He was fighting. He was in the New York office during 9/11. He was in the Middle East in 2003 and 4 when people were trying to figure out what the enemy was. People are trying to figure out the Sunnis and the Shia, and it just became kind of institutionalized.
Right.
And if you're not training, if you're not making sure that your people are aware that they bring their own biases to the table, then you forget about them. Then it becomes the norm. And that really is I don't consider this supervisor to be a bad guy. He served overseas, but he did obtain biases when he was over there. Because as you know, when you went over to the Middle East, what was the first thing they told you? You cannot trust an Iraqi to tell you anything true. They'll literally look at you and tell you the sky is red, and they'll believe it. But when you look at it, that was because Saddam Hussein's government would tell them, hey, the sky is red. And if either they nodded yes,
or you got Buster gassed.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So all these people had to live in a world where you had to lie.
Right.
And then that doesn't go away in 5 years. That was part of that had become part of the Iraqi culture. Yeah. And that's really the shame. That's the shame of it.
Yeah, and interrogation tactics are a lot different over there as well. We talked about that previously, the interrogation tactics and how most people believe that, interrogation becomes effective when you inflict pain or fear. But in actuality, it's quite the opposite because they're used to that pain and fear. That's one thing that their government imposed on them. So you come at them and try to become a friend or a confidant, shit changes.
I don't know how the U.S. ever got in the business of inflicting any type of pain or torture for interrogation, because we've already been through this once. It doesn't work. It's never worked. It won't work because you'll have people lie, and then you'll make more enemies. I mean, I think the one thing the Bureau does very well is we try to take any person that's a subject, we try to flip them. We try to make that subject into our friend, and then we try to get the information on. Maybe we charge them, maybe we don't, and then we put them to work as an informant. But they're not. But every person is a potential friend, except when you hurt them.
Right.
And when you hurt them, they'll never be your friend.
Yeah, I mean, look at Guantanamo. We've taken a whole prison full of people and made them potential terrorists now.
Not potential.
True. I mean,
potential terrorists.
Yeah, some of them have gone back to Afghanistan and are now party leaders in the Taliban. As a matter of fact.
Like number 3 and 4, I think, are party leaders. Yes.
Yeah,
we had them. And I mean, in the first Gulf War, everybody surrendered. All the Iraqi military surrendered because they knew that was the best way out.
Right.
In Iraq, there were no unlawful combatants. In the war on terror, there were, and you got to treat people differently. But once the U.S. military started treating people in Iraq as unlawful combatants, then that turned very much negative. And that was that the US has some very interesting standards. One is in our justice system, the basic premise is we'll let 8 people, 10 people go that are guilty to make sure one innocent man doesn't go to jail. So the trade-off is we're going to let guilty people go to protect innocent people. And then when we get to the laws of war, the laws of war don't work against us; they work for us, because people consider us to play fair when all things are equal. Now, Japan, which been really coming out as history's developed, is one of the reasons Japan was causing their soldiers to commit war crimes. The thought process was because then there was no place to surrender. No one would ever accept a surrender from people that were committing atrocities, and they were correct. They met the Marines, and they turned into this. But we want other sides to surrender. We want enemies to become our friends, and we want our people we arrest to help us out.
Yeah,
absolutely. And think good about us.
Yeah, I remember my military ID card, and on the back of the military ID card is the Geneva Convention.
Yes.
And I swear we have to be the only country that abides by the Geneva Convention to any degree anymore.
But that's okay. Isn't that okay?
It shouldn't be okay. Everybody should.
We are the standard, though.
Right. We are the standard.
We're the standard.
Everybody should be abiding by the Geneva Convention.
But if we don't do it, how can we tell anyone else to do it?
True. Very true.
That if the reason there's a Geneva Convention was because the industrialization of war made war incredibly violent and industrialized. But most places don't treat their prisoners like we do.
Right.
But we have to do it because it works in our favor. It ultimately does work in our favor in all different kinds of ways.
Until the CIA gets a hold of some of these prisons and make them black sites, and then everything changes.
I've never heard of the CIA. Who are they? I joke. I actually did an interrogation of a guy in the Middle East, and he was sitting in a room, and there were 2 Iraqi guards, and he was just being a jerk. And I was being polite as hell. Because my thought process is donut and coffee, and I will crush you by talking to you for 30 hours just because I can talk. So I was in there, and finally, this guy was just being a pain, and he was chained up pretty well. I said, "No, what? I need to get a cup of coffee." So I walked out, and then I came back. When I came back into the room, he had sweat. He was sweating profusely. I'm like, "You okay?" He's like, "Oh, I thought that was a code to have these guys beat the living daylights out of me, or beat me up." I'm like, "No, I was actually going for a cup of coffee. Here's some coffee." And actually, although he had given me information, because he was about to die, he was subject to a death sentence. His attitude changed, and I knew that if he survived the time period, he would have cooperated. But people are human, and yes, I get it. But like I said, the reason we push the Geneva Convention is because it helps us, and it's not easy. No. It's not easy to look the other way when other people abuse our soldiers.
Oh yeah, that's. And you talk about interrogation, so I thought it was really interesting and kind of brutal. The Iraqis are so used to that kind of treatment. And so when they encounter a U.S. force, they expect the same kind of treatment. I mean, even their Olympic soccer team, who lost a game and went back to Iraq, were all tortured and had their feet beat with cane. It's like that's the treatment they're used to.
But what a difference when they. I mean, America. I mean, I think the U.S. as a world leader is different because our 2 worst adversaries, Japan and Germany, are now our staunchest allies.
Right.
That the U.S. considers itself to have a number of very close allies, but we also have countries that are so close to us they're not even allies.
Right.
They're Australia, the United Kingdom,
the Five Eyes.
Yes, Denmark. There are countries that survived World War II that are very much, they're beyond being allies. And I think that's really where we're unique. And that is a special position in the world, that we're strong because of our allies.
Right.
I think just recently, China was facing down, threatening people in South China Sea, and
Taiwan.
next thing you know, the British came, and then the Germans came, and I think the Germans had the first ships in like 20 years in the South China Sea. You have Australia, who's now building nuclear submarines. They're there because they get the point that there's this one leader in the world, one United States, that actually is pretty reliable.
Right.
And I think if you say we left Afghanistan, what were we doing there?
I know. I mean, when you look at it, our original interest with Afghanistan was to help them fight the Russians. And we sent the CIA there. We helped equip them. We built their tunnels. We dug their tunnels where bin Laden hid for a while. And that started the relationship with Afghanistan. But I truly, when I look at how we have worked through the ages and how Britain has worked, Britain was infamous at dropping a flag every time they hit landfall. Their empire grew very, very quick. But with the U.S., especially in modern times, if you go to a foreign country and you see a McDonald's or a Walmart, we've been there.
Yes.
And that's one of the first things that we pop up. We pop up in exchange so the military can grab whatever they need. Next thing that comes is McDonald's and Walmart. We have to Americanize things, and I think that's where the rest of the world kind of gets that negative sentiment, because we bring capitalism into their country. And to be honest, capitalism is good in some aspects, but in other ways it's very poisonous. And I think they only see the poisonous side. They don't see the ability to become somebody through capitalism. I mean, just the world in general today is a really interesting place to live. I would have never thought when I was born in the 70s and was growing up in the 80s that I would ever live in a world quite like what we have now, where not only do we have to battle people on a physical plane, but also in a cyber realm that never existed before. And there are a lot of political decisions made based on actions within that cyber realm, which I think is super dangerous. I think we're going to get to a point where the next major conflict may be started in the cyber realm.
It's already going on. I mean, I was party to a conversation, I think we talked about it, was that the first casualties of cyber attack have already occurred. People have died because of cyber attacks. That you can't look at if I'm looking at in fact, I was just doing it, the art of war, and then applying the art of war into cyber attacks, that you're going to use those attacks as, initially you can damage a country now, right, by, and this is looking at China, is by doing the shock and awe, hammering our outlying bases that are around China with missiles, then simultaneously attacking the electrical and water supplies, disrupting the infrastructure, and then consolidating your holds, take Taiwan, and then say, okay, now come and get us.
Yeah, and we've been doing that for years on a physical plane, going in, and when we invade a country, taking out their critical infrastructure, communications, power, water. We don't even have to go into those countries anymore. We can do that remotely, and that's the scary part.
And you look at some of these the malware, and there are 340 days built into this malware. I mean, you're like, wow, that is awesome. Because a lot of the attacks that we have, I just was looking. You have one attack, they're using stuff that's 4 years old. They're using Meterpreter. They're doing the reconnaissance correctly, but they're not using state of the art code to do this. They're using old stuff, and it still works.
Well, and that's the sad thing, is that the state of cybersecurity is so bad in a lot of companies and countries that you can look up and see vulnerabilities from like 10 years ago still floating on the internet. You still see,
Shodan.
I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And people don't fix it. I mean, I literally have been through 2 ransomware events in the past, I guess, couple weeks that were just shocking, like common sense stuff. But looking at the way that we conduct war on the internet, as opposed to the way we do physical and kinetic war, I think the difference is now we have people in the younger generations fighting these wars on the internet who have never been exposed or had to go into a combat scenario, right? So they don't, everything is not in a realistic concept to them. It's like playing a video game almost. And the people who are trying to defend against that, yeah, we see the downfalls, and we see where they screwed up on certain code, or even there was one ransomware event where they actually took an off-the-shelf product to encrypt the different devices, which was pretty shoddy. But I think when it really gets scary is when we see state actors and people who are I guess educated in the art of war and strategic planning that get a hold of good code. That's when shit's gonna hit the fan.
It's one is the priority,
Mhm.
because you look at my I'm just working on putting a gym together in my house, and the priority was doing 100 different things.
Mhm.
If you have a priority of 100 different things, you have no priority.
Right.
And you have to focus your resources on the threats, the actual. This matter of fact, well, I'm working on with the university to prepare a pen testing course, and then red teaming is critical.
Mhm.
Every organization, and you look at these organizations that are doing red teaming for compliance only, and
Mhm.
that's the biggest mistake you could ever make. You need to use your red teaming to actually test your reactions, test your capabilities, test your firewalls, and then
Mhm.
you can judge it. Now, here's the thing: they're going to lose,
Right.
because in a short time frame, red teamers can break in. I assume that, hey, they're going to break in, and they're going to say, hey, look what we got, we won. No,
Mhm.
because the adversary is going to break in, but it's not breaking in. Once they're in, you can mitigate the damage, you can block them out, you can start doing the things it takes to actually get them out of your system. Because on average, I mean, I haven't looked recently, but at one point, the average threat actor was
290 days.
yes, they're in there forever. So that's the trick. If you get breached, okay, but you have to be able to mitigate this, identify them when they're in there, understand how they're pivoting. And this is why that I think that, and I was getting a little confused. We got red, blue, purple, but I do think the purple idea of having blue team that can actually mimic specific threat actors using specific code and specific actions and reconnaissance between red teaming is the essential part of that. Because if you're just relying on antivirus and firewalls, and you can't do anything to actually simulate an attack, a specific attack within that, you're really missing an important part of the defense.
Yeah, and
Because
I think that ex-military are actually some of the best defenders and red teamers, because we do have that strategical mindset, and we do have that militarized kind of behavior. One of the things that we do when we're responding to ransomware or one of those events is microsegmentation, and basically blocking off communications between devices.
yes,
But so red team is important, blue team is important, purple team is important. The part that I think that we're failing at, and this is what used to get to me as a pen tester, is when someone tells me that's not in scope. And to me, an attacker is not going to go, okay, well, that's not in scope, so maybe we shouldn't mess with that. Obviously, that's off limits. That's bullshit. If you hire a red team to do a real pen test and to check your security, there should be no scope. Like, you should be under fire.
except if the scope you're talking about is in a hospital and you're actually going into the device where there's surgery.
Yeah,
or
but you could still mimic that environment, right? So
well, that's
move
the
it
other
onto a
thing.
range. Yeah.
Bingo. That
Yeah.
you don't have to do it in the real environment. You can actually create that in a virtual environment to attack it.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Again, but in a lot, and I always laugh when I see the red teams and they're like, okay, they the report is always the most important, I think the most important thing.
Right.
But they're reporting all different tasks, what to do. And then the red teamer's like, you should just take this stuff offline. You should just segregate, segment the whole thing. And the people look at like, that's genius. I'm like, no, really, it's not. I mean, this is older equipment. But getting the red teams in there and actually have them say, you can go after everything, especially the laptops, because you could take the laptops, create a virtual environment, actually have real laptops in there, and let the red team to go to town on those things for a few weeks prior. And because laptops are huge now, and look at that. And again, the cloud, same thing. You can now take a cloud, you can actually copy the entire thing, put that into a test environment, and then let the red team have. The one issue that you don't have in that is you don't really have the blue team and sometimes able to respond if it's just the environment, because it's not really the blue team's environment to work on unless you actually start making it more complicated. But you're right. I mean, but again, no matter what the blue team does, you're going to be better than it initially. Yeah. If they're able to identify you, they'll be able to lock you out, and then you can try again. I assume that there will always be an exploitation. If everything's at the front, the firewall, and at the boundary line, demarcation, you're going to lose. You have to have that defense in depth, and also you have to have reconnaissance within the perimeter. Again, all military ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the cyber defense and cyber offensive measurements came from the military. I mean, it came from that military mindset. I thought it was funny you brought up Sun Tzu, The Art of War, because I live by that book. It can be applied in so many different areas, not just what you do in your job, or not just the military, but in everything you do, relationships, everything. I think that, to me, that's my own Bible is The Art of War. So Kurt, we have hit way past the hour.
I'm sorry.
No.
It was like good. 10 minutes. I'm sorry. This is exactly what we did the last time.
I know, right? I mean, we could have multiple episodes of just you and I talking. And I think people would be happy with it, because we always have such great conversations. But I want to thank you for coming on the show and taking your time and sharing your story. And it's a really important story, I think. Are there any questions you have for me or for the group that you want to discuss?
No, I have to tell you that I saw the T-shirt or your sweatshirt, which is what every red teamer has to have, the black hoodie, because that is it. And my wife just stole my DEF CON one. I'm like, look, I have to get one, but I'm picking one of those up because that is the best. And oh, by the way, your music beforehand, I was actually writing notes on, because I was like, hey, wait, this is all new music I haven't heard on YouTube. So thank you very much for all that.
Yeah, I try to make it to be as close to a real show as possible. And for people who are watching who only see the recorded part of it, we actually meet for an hour before the podcast, and I play a playlist for that week. And I mix in different music that I pick up here and there in different countries. But again, Kurt, thanks a lot. And I need to put you on speed dial, because I think someone like you would be a critical asset to have in my back pocket. For sure.
Anytime. I really appreciate talking to you. It was fun. It was as enjoyable the last time as this time. So anytime you want to talk, please give me a call. Okay.
Absolutely.
Ian, thank you very much.
Let's set it up for if you're available on the 30th. We are having the 1-year anniversary, and maybe you can stop in and be part of it.
I will. I will stop. I will stop in, and if you want to talk, like I said, I appreciate it. Especially if there's some new event that we could talk about and badmouth somebody on.
Yeah, I'm sure we can find something. If not, maybe I can create one. I don't know. We'll see.
Everyone out there, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Take care, guys. Take care.
Have a good weekend.